All right, so we're moving on to metabolic pathways, which is basically, how we eat our food, how we get energy and nutrition from that food. And the overall picture all has to do with the carbon cycle, right? Where you are walking, talking bags of organic chemistry, which is carbon-based. So everything about us has to do with carbon. And then the other important component is energy. So generally what we're talking about here is Gibbs free energy, generally denoted as delta G or just G. And Gibbs free energy is basically just a measurement of energy that can be used to do work. Right? We can use energy to do work, and this is just a measure of that. Anytime you do any kind of process that involves using energy, some of that energy will be wasted. You can never get 100% of it to do work, but so basically Gibbs free energy is a measure of how much of that energy can we use to do work. And remember, there's two main possibilities for delta G. It can either be positive or it can be negative. If it's positive, we can imagine that you're pushing a ball up a hill, right? So you're that little dude here, and then you're going to push this ball up the hill. If you think about pushing a ball uphill, this is a non-spontaneous process, aka it won't happen on its own, right? The ball is not just going to climb up this hill. There's going to be energy required to do so. And so basically what that means is that we have to couple it with a spontaneous process, right? So pushing this ball up the hill is a non-spontaneous process, but the reason that we can make it happen is because inside of your body are all kinds of chemical reactions that are releasing energy, and then that energy is being channeled into pushing this ball up the hill. And then, of course, the other option is to have the ball roll down the hill. That is a spontaneous process, right? If you put a ball on the side of the hill, it will go down. And this releases energy. And we can use this energy to do work. So think about my favorite example of this is like hydroelectric power. But it can be all kinds of things: solar power, wind power, gasoline, whatever. If we think about, water flowing down a hill, what you can do is put a turbine down there, and then you can store or get energy from that water, which can then be used to do work. And so in our human bodies, we have these kinds of processes going on. So we have carbon dioxide on one side, and then we have reduced forms of carbon on the other side. So these are carbon that's been reduced, right? So instead of having CO bonds, instead of being bonded to a very electronegative atom, they're bonded to less electronegative atoms, generally other carbons or hydrogens. There are other stuff that it can be bonded to, such as some oxygens and whatnot, but that's not the main point. And then some oxygen, right? So when we're going from left to right, that is reduction. Right? If you think about the oxidation state of this carbon, it's +4. If you think about the oxidation state of these carbons, they are less than +4. And so whenever we do this reduction, we actually have a negative delta G. Or my bad, a positive delta G, my bad. And so this process is non-spontaneous. And so it's not going to happen by itself. Carbon dioxide is not just going to be reduced by itself. It needs to be forced to do so. And the way that you force it to do so is you couple it with a spontaneous reaction. So we'll just say need to be coupled with a spontaneous reaction, right? Basically, the way you can think about it is to reduce CO2, it takes energy. So that energy has to come from somewhere else. And then, of course, we can have the opposite going from right to left. That would be oxidation. Here, the delta G is negative, which means that this is a spontaneous process. And so what we can do with this spontaneous process is that we can couple it with non-spontaneous reactions. So can be used to do work by coupling with non-spontaneous reactions. right? So oxidizing carbon is a delta G of negative, and so that can be used to do work. And this all has to do with the big old carbon cycle, right? So we have carbon dioxide in our air, which we need some of it, right? Carbon dioxide is not so great right now in our current situation, but we need some of it. And this carbon dioxide is taken in by what? Well, it's taken in by plants. So there's my broccoli tree thing. And the plant uses the power from the sun to reduce carbon dioxide, right? You learned about that process probably in grade school, photosynthesis. And it's a reduction, right? And then the energy that it's using to reduce it all comes from the sun. So without photosynthesis, we would not be alive on this earth. And of course, we've kind of figured out how to use sunlight for energy through the use of solar cells, but that's a much more simple process than what plants do. Anyways, they take this carbon dioxide and they reduce it to carbon-carbon chains with hydrogen bonds, and then other functional groups depending on what they're reducing it to, right? Generally, they reduce it to carbohydrates, but then these carbohydrates can be taken and turned into fats or proteins and all kinds of stuff. And then what do we as humans do? We eat these plants, right? And then we take in these reduced carbons, and then we metabolize them, right? So this is a form of oxidation. So we're oxidizing these sugars, and then so that we're releasing energy. And so we use that excess energy to live. And then, of course, we then breathe out carbon dioxide, and then the cycle continues and continues. And so a big goal of biochemistry is to learn about these metabolic pathways. Right, so that's the study, say, of how this occurs. Right, how do we take in these nutrients, metabolize them, and then use them for energy or other nutrients that we need?